What happens when a legendary actor refuses to play by the unwritten rules of daytime television, especially when faced with a talk show host who has built her reputation on steamrolling guests into submission? You're about to witness exactly that, one of the most explosive, unforgettable, and chaotic on-air meltdowns ever captured on daytime TV. Joy Behar, known for her sharp tongue and even sharper ambush-style interviews, thought she could handle Gary Oldman the same way she handles everyone else. She walked into that studio utterly convinced she could corner him, provoke him, and force him into a soundbite that would trend for days. But she had no idea she was stepping into a showdown she wouldn't win. By the time this interview was over, Joy would be the one storming off the set of her own show, leaving her co-host stunned, the audience speechless, and viewers around the world scrambling to replay the moment online. But let's rewind a little before the eruption, before the tension, before the sparks, before everything began to unravel. It was an ordinary Tuesday morning at The View, ordinary in the sense that the studio floor was buzzing with its usual mixture of last-minute nerves and caffeinated energy. Makeup artists darted from chair to chair applying final touches. Producers whispered urgently into headsets while waving cue cards, and the audience filled the seats with excited chatter. On paper, the day was supposed to be straightforward. Gary Oldman, one of the most acclaimed actors of his generation, was scheduled to appear in the second segment to promote his new film, a gritty political drama delving into corruption, manipulation, and the moral compromises people make in pursuit of power. To everyone involved, this should have been a routine press appearance, one more stop on a standard promotional tour. But unbeknownst to the producers, the hosts, and even the audience, a fuse had already been set. And Joy Behar, armed with what she believed to be killer questions, was unknowingly holding the match. Joy sat at her usual place at the iconic table, coffee in one hand, stack of notes in the other, her expression a blend of confidence and thinly veiled anticipation. She believed she had done her homework, though, as events would reveal, her preparation was selective at best. Despite Gary Oldman's decades-long career filled with groundbreaking, transformative roles, from historical figures to villains to heroes, Joy seemed far less interested in discussing his craft. Instead, she had locked onto one thing, a handful of off-hand comments Oldman had made months earlier during an interview in Britain. Comments about American politics, comments she believed she could use to corner him publicly. When the show returned from a commercial break, Whoopi Goldberg, ever the smooth and steady presence, introduced their guest. Gary Oldman walked onto the stage with the calm assurance of someone who has spent his entire life in the spotlight. Dressed sharply but not showily, he waved to the audience with a warm, genuine smile. The applause was loud and affectionate, an acknowledgement of his unparalleled talent and long-standing legacy. Gary Oldman, everyone, Whoopi said as the audience settled. "Thank you so much for being here. We're excited to talk about your new film." "Thank you for having me," Oldman replied in his measured English accent. "It's a pleasure to be here." The interview began exactly as expected. Whoopi asked him about his preparation for the role. Oldman spoke about the research he undertook, the people he met, and the emotional depth required to portray a character entrenched in political corruption. The other hosts added thoughtful questions about the film's themes, the real-world parallels, and the importance of storytelling in understanding societal power dynamics. Everything was moving smoothly. Then Joy leaned forward. It was subtle but unmistakable. A familiar glint flashed in her eyes, a signal long-time viewers recognized instantly. Trouble was coming. The temperature in the room seemed to drop a degree. Her voice shifted, adopting the sharper, more aggressive tone she reserves for moments where she intends not to understand, but to interrogate. "Gary, I have to ask you about something," she began, clasping her hands together as if preparing for battle. "A few months ago, you made some comments about American voters that I found pretty concerning." The studio fell silent, even the audience leaned in, sensing the shift. Oldman's expression remained polite, but those who knew him well, his colleagues, his friends, perhaps even some fans, might have noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes. Not anger, not fear, something closer to annoyance mixed with disbelief. "I'm not sure I follow," he said calmly. Could you be more specific about what comments you're referring to? Joy lifted a printed sheet of paper, as if revealing evidence in a courtroom. She had clearly prepared for this moment, rehearsed it even. You said, she declared, reading dramatically, and I quote, that American political discourse has become so polarized that voters on both sides often make decisions based on emotion rather than facts. Her tone suggested she believed she had caught him red-handed. She waited, expecting him to backpedal, panic, or apologize. She did not expect what happened next. That sounds pretty condescending to me, Joy fired back, her voice sharp enough to cut through the air. Her words hung there for a moment, bold and provocative, as if she believed she had just landed a decisive blow. The audience reacted with a mixed ripple of murmurs, some surprised, others leaning forward, as though sensing the beginning of a collision no one could stop. Oldman didn't rush to respond. Instead, he paused, a long, deliberate pause that communicated far more than any immediate retort could. He looked at Joy with a calmness that felt unnervingly precise, like someone preparing their next move in a chess match rather than engaging in a daytime TV skirmish. Well, Joy, he began slowly, if you're going to quote me, then perhaps you should provide the full context. His tone remained polite, but there was weight behind his words now. That interview you're referencing was part of a much broader conversation about the role of artists. It's our responsibility to present complex societal issues in nuanced ways. It wasn't an indictment of any group, nor was it meant to be taken as a blanket judgment of American voters. Joy didn't flinch. She doubled down, her chin lifting slightly as she leaned forward in her chair. But you did say it. Her voice rose just a touch, not enough to shout, but enough to signal she believed she was tightening the noose. You can't deny that. Oldman's eyes narrowed, barely, but noticeably. It was the kind of expression that suggested patience thinning by the second. I'm not denying anything, he replied, still steady, but with an unmistakable edge creeping into his voice. What I'm suggesting is that taking a small portion of a much longer conversation and presenting it without context is exactly the sort of thing that contributes to the very polarization you claim to be concerned about. You could almost feel the oxygen leaving the room. The tension became a presence, thick, alive, and pulsing. The other hosts shifted in their seats, glancing back and forth between Joy and Oldman like spectators trapped ringside at a match they never asked to attend. Some looked concerned. Others seemed unsure whether to intervene or stay silent and let the two giants continue their verbal sparring. Meanwhile, the studio audience knew something unusual was unfolding. This wasn't the typical tense exchange or heated political disagreement The View was famous for. This was different. This was two strong personalities colliding head-on, with neither willing to yield. Joy's eyes gleamed with the thrill of confrontation. She wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed more determined. Context or no context, Gary, she said, folding her arms as if preparing for battle. You're a guest in our country, promoting your movies here, making your money here, and then you go overseas and criticize how Americans think and vote. Her lips tightened into a thin smile, sharp, triumphant. Don't you think that's just a little bit hypocritical? The moment she said it, the studio shifted again. Some audience members murmured in disapproval. Others gasped. A few seemed to brace themselves, sensing the line had been crossed. That was the moment Gary Oldman's demeanor changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't theatrical, but it was seismic. The politeness remained in his posture, his expression, the cadence of his voice. But underneath it, something steely snapped into place. A strength, a boundary, a refusal to be diminished. A guest in your country. Oldman repeated slowly, softly, but with a gravity that made everyone in the room straighten in their seats. He leaned forward slightly, just enough to command the space without raising his voice. Joy, I've paid more in taxes to this country than most people will see in a lifetime. I've raised my children here, built a life here, contributed to communities here, worked alongside Americans, hired Americans, lived among Americans. His voice deepened. The idea that having a British accent makes me some kind of outsider looking in is not just wrong. It's frankly insulting. The studio reacted immediately. Soft murmurs rippled through the audience, some uncomfortable, some thrilled, many stunned. People exchanged looks as if silently asking, did Joy really go there? And did Gary Oldman really push back like that? Some viewers shifted in their seats, clearly uneasy with Joy's line of questioning. Others were energized, almost exhilarated, by the brewing conflict. The emotional temperature in the room had risen dramatically, and there was no sign of it cooling. Joy felt the shift too. Her posture stiffened. For the first time since she had started pressing him, her expression flickered, just briefly, with something that looked almost like surprise. She realized she had struck a nerve, perhaps deeper than she intended. But instead of backing away, she pushed forward, instinctively doubling down as she always did when faced with resistance. What she underestimated, however, was that Gary Oldman was no ordinary Hollywood guest. He wasn't someone who wilted under pressure or smiled politely while being cornered. He was composed, sharp, and unafraid to meet hostility with unshakable clarity, and the audience knew it. The co-hosts knew it. And deep down, Joy knew it too. But she also knew she had started something she couldn't simply abandon now, not without looking like she had miscalculated. So she prepared her next line, unaware that she was edging closer and closer to the breaking point that would turn an ordinary interview into one of the most talked-about moments in daytime television history. Instead of backing down, Joy doubled down with even more force than before. Her voice sharpened, and she leaned forward as if ready to strike with her next sentence. "I'm not saying you're not welcome here, Gary," she insisted, her tone dripping with condescension disguised as concern. "What I'm saying is that maybe you should be a little more grateful for the opportunities America has given you, instead of criticizing the people who made your success possible." The word grateful hung in the air like a challenge thrown across the table. Gary Oldman didn't react immediately. His voice remained controlled, steady, almost dangerously calm, but that single word seemed to carry a new weight. He looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and restrained irritation. "Joy," he said slowly, "gratitude doesn't require silence. In fact, I'd argue that real gratitude, true gratitude, the kind that comes from genuinely caring about a place and its people, sometimes requires asking difficult questions and having uncomfortable conversations." It was clear he was trying to de-escalate, to bring nuance back into the discussion. But Joy was not in the mood for nuance. Whoopi Goldberg sensed the rising tension and attempted to intervene, lifting a hand slightly. "Maybe we should talk about the film," she suggested gently, trying to redirect the conversation before it spiraled further. But Joy was already too deep into her own momentum. Her expression told everyone in the room that she believed she had the moral high ground. She ignored Whoopi completely. "That's a nice way to put it, Gary," she said, her voice edged with smugness. "But what I heard was you talking down to American voters, like we're all too stupid to understand what's going on in our own country." Gary Oldman set down the water glass he had been holding. The movement was precise, deliberate, like a man preparing to speak with complete clarity. He looked directly at Joy, and when he finally spoke, his voice wasn't raised. It was quiet, steady, but it carried effortlessly through the studio. "Joy," he began, "I've sat through a lot of interviews in my career. I've been asked provocative questions, challenging questions, even hostile ones, but what you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's not even good television." The audience shifted uncomfortably. Joy blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. Gary continued, his words measured and precise. "You've taken a thoughtful conversation about the role of media in democracy, stripped it of all context, and turned it into a weapon to attack a guest on your own show. If anyone here is talking down to people, it's you. Talking down to your own audience by assuming they can't handle nuance, complexity." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. It was the kind of silence that only occurs when everyone in the room realizes a line has been crossed. Joy Behar's face flushed a deep red. Even her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the anger and humiliation bubbling just beneath the surface. She was not accustomed to being called out so directly, certainly not on live television, and definitely not by a guest. "Excuse me," she snapped, her voice cracking slightly as she tried to regain her footing. "I think you're being a little dramatic here, Gary. I'm just asking legitimate questions." Gary leaned back slightly in his chair, though his eyes never left her. His expression stayed chimерally calm, considering the tension. "Dramatic," he repeated. Joy, you've accused me of being ungrateful for working in America, suggested I'm some kind of foreign interloper criticizing your voters, and misrepresented my words to manufacture controversy. If that's your definition of legitimate journalism, then perhaps we have very different standards. The other hosts squirmed in their seats. Sunny looked down at her notes. Sarah shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact. Even Whoopi's composure began to crack as she braced herself for what was clearly turning into a confrontation far beyond her control. No, Joy suddenly interrupted, her voice sharp and cutting. Her famous temper, long the subject of jokes and commentary, had now fully emerged. I can speak for myself, thank you very much. She jabbed a finger slightly in Gary's direction, the gesture small but filled with fury. And what I'm saying, Gary, is that you seem to have a real problem with Americans having opinions about your opinions. She leaned forward aggressively, as though trying to physically push him back with the force of her words. Isn't that exactly the kind of elitist attitude people are tired of? Gary's eyebrows lifted slightly. It was subtle, but significant. For the first time since the confrontation began, a flicker of amusement, dry, sardonic amusement, passed across his expression. Elitist, he repeated softly. He then tilted his head just a little, studying her as if she had presented him with an absurd puzzle. Joy, you're sitting on a national television show, interrupting your guest, misquoting him, and then attacking him for defending himself. He paused, allowing the words to sink in. If we're talking about elitist behavior, perhaps you should look in a mirror. The audience reacted instantly, a collective gasp, sharp, stunned, crippling across the studio. Several people murmured in agreement. A few even whispered, "Wow." Joy's face shifted from red to an even deeper shade, borderline purple. Her eyes narrowed, her jaw tightened, and her breathing became visibly sharper. It was clear she had lost control of the exchange, and she knew it. "How dare you?" she hissed, leaning forward so aggressively that Sarah instinctively pulled back. The anger in Joy's voice wasn't just professional frustration. It was personal, raw, and unfiltered. And the entire studio knew it. Joy's outrage escalated so intensely that even the cameras seemed to lean away from her. She turned sharply toward the producers standing just off camera, her voice sharp and slicing through the chaotic tension. "Get him out of here," she demanded, jabbing her finger toward Oldman as if he were some dangerous intruder rather than a distinguished guest. "I'm not doing this anymore. Either he goes or I go." The producers exchanged anxious glances. They were used to on-air tension, but this was a level beyond anything they normally had to manage. Before anyone could respond, Whoopi Goldberg rose from her seat. Her face showed a mixture of exasperation, disappointment, and the weary experience of someone who had spent years trying to keep unpredictable television moments from becoming disasters. "Joy," Whoopi said, hands extended in a calming gesture, "let's just take a breath. Let's calm down." "Don't tell me to calm down," Joy snapped, whirling on her longtime colleague as though Whoopi had personally betrayed her. Her voice cracked under the strain. "Are you taking a side too? Is everyone here going to just sit there and let this man come on our show and disrespect me?" The accusation hung in the air, heavy and unfair. The other hosts looked anywhere but at Joy. The discomfort on their faces unmistakable. Meanwhile, Gary Oldman had not moved except to adjust his jacket and take a quiet breath. He turned to one of the producers with a calmness that only made the entire situation seem more lopsided. "I think it's best if I leave," he said in a low, steady voice. "This clearly isn't productive for anyone." Joy let out a bitter, humorless laugh that echoed across the studio. "Oh, so now you're the victim," she sneered. "Run away, Gary. Go back to your British friends and tell them how awful the Americans were to you. I'm sure they'll love that story." Her words dripped with resentment, sarcasm, and something deeper. Something that looked a lot like insecurity. Oldman paused midway through gathering his belongings, his hand stilled on his briefcase. Then he lifted his head and looked at her one final time with a calm, cold clarity that seemed to freeze the room. "Joy," he said, every word deliberate, "I came here to talk about a film that deals with corruption and the abuse of power." He let the silence stretch, piercing and controlled. "I had no idea I'd be getting such a vivid demonstration of both." The statement hit the room like a lightning bolt. Joy snapped, truly snapped, "Get out, get out." She screamed, her voice echoing off the studio walls. her composure completely destroyed. "Security. I want him removed from the building." Calling security on a guest who had done nothing but defend himself would have been comedic if it weren't so deeply unprofessional. The audience gasped, and then a low wave of booing began. No one could tell whether the crowd was booing the treatment Gary Oldman had received or Joy's increasingly unhinged behavior. Whoopi's face was a portrait of exhaustion. Sarah and Sunny looked horrified. Producers were whispering urgently into headsets. The entire studio felt like a ship that had hit an iceberg, slowly sinking, everyone scrambling to figure out what to do next. Gary Oldman, however, remained composed. He walked calmly toward the exit, shoulders straight, pace unhurried. He stopped only to shake hands with Whoopi and the other hosts, offering them quiet words of appreciation for their professionalism. He did not look at Joy again. He didn't need to. Her rage filled the space all on its own. As he moved offstage, Joy continued her tirade like a storm cloud refusing to pass. "This is exactly what's wrong with this country." She shouted after him, her voice rising even though Gary was already out of sight. No respect for the people who built this industry. Her hair was coming loose, her makeup streaked, and her hands shook with adrenaline. Still, she kept shouting, more at the room than at Gary, who was gone. The messy mixture of anger, embarrassment, and fear made her seem smaller with every word she hurled. Finally, after a long, suffocating silence, Ana Navarro, who had remained quiet through the entire chaos, spoke up. Her tone was measured but firm. "Joy, maybe you should. Maybe I should what?" Joy snapped, spinning around so fast that Ana involuntarily took a step back. Joy's appearance was disheveled now, mascara smudged beneath her eyes, hair falling out of place, breathing uneven. She looked less like a seasoned television host and more like someone cornered. Joy's voice trembled with that dangerous blend of anger and wounded pride. "Maybe I should apologize for standing up to someone who thinks he's better than us. Is that what you're going to say?" Her voice cracked. "Maybe I should just bow down and let him insult me." Ana held up her hands, trying to de-escalate. "Joy, that's not what happened." Joy didn't let her finish. She rarely let anyone finish. The studio was pure chaos now. Producers shouting directions, audience members whispering loudly, cameras capturing footage no one knew how to salvage, and Joy standing center stage, unraveling in real time. And for the first time since the confrontation began, the entire set felt fragile, like the foundations of the show had been shaken, maybe even permanently cracked. "You come on our show, on our platform, and you have the nerve to lecture me about journalism." Joy snapped, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. "I've been doing this longer than you've been making movies in this country." The words were meant to land like a knockout punch, but instead they floated in the air, brittle and strained. And yet, Oldman replied with devastating calm, "Experience doesn't seem to have translated into wisdom or professionalism." The studio froze. Time seemed to pause, just for a heartbeat, before everything shattered. Joy shot up from her chair with such force that it rolled backward several feet, nearly crashing into a stagehand rushing to stabilize it. Gasps echoed through the audience. Her face was flushed, her chest heaving, every muscle taut with indignation. "That's it," she screamed. "I'm not going to sit here and be insulted by someone who thinks his British accent makes him better than everyone else. Joy, please." Whoopi tried to step in, raising a calming hand, but Joy tore her arm away from the table as if physically rejecting any attempt at restraint. "No, Whoopi," she shouted, her voice cracking under the strain. "This is exactly what's wrong with Hollywood and the media. These people come here, make millions off American audiences, and then turn around and act like we're beneath them. I'm sick of it." Her words ricocheted around the studio like bullets, raw and uncontrolled. Meanwhile, Gary Oldman remained seated, still, composed, almost serene, which only added to the surreal contrast. His hands were folded neatly in his lap, his expression not angry, not defensive, just deeply disappointed. "Joy," he said softly, "at no point have I suggested that anyone is beneath me. What I have suggested is that you're behaving unprofessionally, and your response," he added, lowering his voice, "is proving my point rather spectacularly. Unprofessionally." Joy shrieked, the pitch of her voice climbing to near hysteria. "You want to see unprofessional? Unprofessional is coming on a talk show and acting like you're too good to answer direct questions. "I've answered every question you've asked," Oldman replied evenly. "What I haven't done is allow you to misrepresent my words or attack my character without responding. If that makes you uncomfortable, then perhaps the problem isn't with my answers." The studio seemed to tilt. The audience was glued to the unfolding chaos. Some died, others covering their mouths, unsure whether they were witnessing a live interview or the implosion of a decades-long career. Sarah Haynes, pale and clearly panicking, jumped in with desperate urgency. "Maybe we should take a commercial break." "No," Joy shouted, whirling around to face her colleague so abruptly that Sarah flinched. "We're not taking a break. I want everyone to see this. I want them to see how these Hollywood elites really feel about regular Americans." The energy in the room became electric, volatile. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown to something inevitable. And then Gary Oldman stood. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't forceful. He simply rose to his full height, but the effect was immediate and commanding. His presence dwarfed Joy's angry theatrics, swallowing the chaos with an authority forged through decades of disciplined craft. "Joy," he began, his voice low and steady, cutting through her hysteria like a blade slicing through fog. "I've spent my entire career playing characters, studying human nature, understanding what drives people to behave the way they do." He took a step forward, not threatening, but certain. "And right now, I am watching someone who is so desperate to be right, so terrified of being challenged, that she's willing to embarrass herself and her colleagues on national television rather than admit she made a mistake." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. "I didn't make any mistake," Joy screamed, her voice so loud it cracked. Spittle flew from her mouth as she jabbed a trembling finger toward him. "The mistake was booking you on this show in the first place." "Perhaps," Oldman said quietly. Joy blinked, thrown off by the unexpected agreement, "but not for the reasons you think." The way he delivered the line, gentle, unhurried, almost regretful, hit harder than any insult could have. It didn't ignite her rage. It dissolved the structure holding it together. The audience could almost see it, the invisible fracture that appeared in Joy's expression, the moment something inside her buckled under the weight of her own outburst. For the first time, she looked less furious and more shaken. Oldman's calmness contrasted so sharply with her spiraling anger that it exposed the imbalance between them. She wasn't in control. She wasn't winning. She wasn't even arguing anymore. She was unraveling, live on camera in front of millions. Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted from Oldman to the audience to the cameras, as if suddenly realizing the enormity of what she had done, what she had said, and how far she had gone. And for the first time in her long career, Joy Behar seemed genuinely unsure whether she could salvage the moment, or herself.